back, everybody, for episode 6 of Boarderline Genius. We have a name, but we still don't have a logo, and we're still filming on Teams. But as we were saying off camera before, progress over perfection with this podcast/interview. But by way of introduction, my name is Andrew. I'm a Melbourne-based game designer based in Australia. Created this little guy here, AFL licensed game called Footy Feud that's sold about 100,000 copies now, which is pretty cool. And also soon to be released a Marvel IP as well that will be coming to Australian retail in September. But the rationale behind this podcast is really to give a bit back to the Australian gaming community. There's such a wide and varied roster of Australian game designers that we can all learn so much from each other, and anybody who hopefully has an interest in this hobby can learn a thing or two about the process as well. So really fortunate to have on this evening Erica from Trigahex. Now, Erica and I met at Tabletop Con on the Gold Coast a couple of weeks ago, and we were neighbours there, and my wife in particular was probably at your stand, Erica, more than what she was at mine. So much was her love for Trigahex, and her love was amplified even more when she beat me twice consecutively. So yeah, she absolutely loves it. So yeah, wonderful to have you on the show this evening.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, she really enjoyed it. It was good
games. She really did. Yeah, and she showed it to all her friends as well, which has been great with overwhelmingly positive feedback. So yeah,
fantastic.
The way how we kind of start, as we were kind of saying before, pretty informal. But tell us a bit about the inspiration behind Trigahex and how you got into game design as well.
Well, it was kind of by accident, really. We started playing games as a family before COVID hit. So our children are grown up, they're adults, and it was just a time that we all got together once a month, and that was our games night. And we started playing in sequence. So my mum had gone for a bowls weekend, played sequence with her friends, and then brought it back to the family, and that was our game of choice. Yep. And I guess I've always done something creative as well as my day job. And I just decided to design a game one day. So, but I started to think of a game, and the more I thought about it, I thought, oh, it's a bit similar to other games.
Yeah.
So I started to think how I could change it. So I was in traffic one day, and I started to think that it would be pretty cool if I changed the shape of the cars. So I started to look around at the signs on the road, and looking at all the different shapes, and I saw this guy broken down on the side of the road while I was in traffic, and he had one of those triangular warning signs at the back of his car, and I just thought that's a sign for me. So I started to think about triangles. So by the time I got home, which was about 40 minutes later, I'd already mapped the game out in my head. So I rushed through the door to jot it all down and start sketching out the game. And I guess that's kind of how Trigahex came about.
That's absolutely sensational. And I think like there's even so many things to unpick there. But for someone who'd never created a game before, thought, I enjoy playing games, I'm going to give this a crack. How did you even find not just the moment of inspiration, but going straight from like, I'm going to do this to, as you said, you couldn't wait to get home and jot everything down because you had such a clear picture of what you wanted it to look like.
Yeah, I think that was what it was. It worked in my mind. So I just was then determined, because I really wanted to make a go of it. I just saw it as a challenge. And and I guess I liked the design more than I thought about the mechanics or the game. I thought it would work, but I knew it would need lots of play testing. But it was the design that appealed to me probably most. So I'm probably a designer more than a gamer first. And then when I started to think about the mechanics, it started just to make sense to me. So I started to then work through how to play it.
Yeah. And when you say design in particular, like you see yourself as a designer first, like what does that word and that concept mean to you?
Well, I've always done something like office admin or project management. That I've always had that, serious job to keep the bills paid, but I've always done something, creative on the side as well, whether it be a craft project or starting a design business, or I've even made fairy gardens in my past life. So I've always done something like that. So I've always felt, the challenge of that, not qualified by any means, but I just enjoy, that creative side that I have. I've always enjoyed art and bright colours and colour matching patterns, that's always been the thing that I've liked. So
absolutely. And how do you think like that passion, I guess it probably like accelerated the learning curve a fair bit as well, right? That you kind of think about, say, colours and patterns, and then how the triangles then fit to form patterns, and you can just kind of see the evolution just kind of goes quite naturally from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, at the time when I thought about it, when I rushed through the door that day, I didn't know how many triangles would make up a hexagon, even an equilateral triangle. I had to Google search all of that. So, you know, I kind of had it in my head, the design in my head, but I actually didn't know how it was going to work or whether it was going to work. And when I first created it, I had numbers on the cards. I had like a mathematical calculation to the hexagons as well. But I've discovered by playtesting them, it was overcomplicated. And because the design of the game was simple, easy to learn, simple to play, I just wanted to carry that through, with the mechanics, the design, everything was, the simple branding. So it was important that I took that calculation off. That might come out as an extension later, but it just overcomplicated the game, so I really needed to change it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think within that as well, as you said that you describe yourself as a designer first, and then you had to work out what the mechanics are. I think almost the headline there for me is like vision into action. Like you kind of have a vision that you want to create a game, you've got a concept in mind, you've taken inspiration from the triangles, but then you've got to then work, okay, how am I going to bring this to life? What are the rules going to look like?
Yeah.
Which can be quite an intimidating prospect, right? For somebody who's doing this first time and is learning on the go. So, which all of us have done, right? Like all of us have been first time game designers upon our journey. Right. So kind of, help our audience and myself understand how you went about that, how you felt doing it. Did you feel like the journey came really naturally to you, or was it a bit clunky? How did you work through that? Really keen to understand more.
Yeah, I guess I just saw it as a challenge, and I just started, I started with pieces of card from Officeworks, cutting out triangles and textures and crayons and just playing with colours and cutting out card, and it was really visual for me. I had something that I could actually play with, and I had to get what was in my mind down on the paper so that I could start playing with the colours and fitting them together, and it was just a really manual process, I guess. And then sometimes if I couldn't think of a fix for something, or I couldn't think of the colour combinations, I just stopped thinking about it for a while. So I think time was really my friend, and it was on my side. I would just try and not think about it, and then all of a sudden I'd be driving or in the shower, and it would just come to mind.
It's so interesting you say that. And I think that a lot of us have that, regardless of where we are on our games journey, that you always think about something too hard and the answer just doesn't come. I find it probably happens a bit with my to-do list in particular. That's like you're sitting down at your desk and you can't quite think about what to do next, and then you step away and suddenly it's like, oh, I've got all these things I have to do. How did I not spend that time doing it? So I think that that's an insight there, right? And even knowing that it's a side hustle, you're a first-time game designer, you've thrown yourself into the deep end. How did you even kind of balance with yourself, like what's the right amount of time to be spending on it, or when is the effort kind of yielding a result versus I'm just going to give myself permission to step away here because I feel like I need a break? Walk me through that kind of process as well.
Well, I was working full time and doing a few hours at home, so I tried not to set a timeline to it. I tried to just be quite forgiving. I always, with everything I do, if I can't think of a solution, it's like I have faith that something's just going to present itself. It's just going to work out. And I think just having that belief just does make it work out for some reason. I find that the more I think about something, the more jumbled the conversation becomes in my head. So if I just leave it to rest and just have that faith that I'm just going to suddenly think of something, and then it generally does. So I think just by having that clear mind and not having that time frame that I have to have it developed by a certain time, and it will just come to me. And then when it does, it will be the right answer or the right solution. It took me months to try and, work through the colour combinations, so they had the right amount of colours on the edges of the cards. And, I didn't mind that it took that amount of time because I didn't have that deadline to work to. And I just had the faith that I would finally get there. I would get to the result that I needed at the end. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, right? And I think that's probably for me is a really key insight to emerge, of having mental clarity. And it doesn't, in this particular stage, it was finding the solution to a problem and where you encountered a roadblock, but you know yourself well enough that's like, okay, I'm doing this for the first time, but I know how I operate well enough. It's like, if I think more about this, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole that I'm just going to get
Yeah.
jumbled. I need to
Yeah.
approach this with some mental clarity to then
Yeah.
progress forward with it. And I think that
Yeah.
we can all give ourselves that permission, regardless of whether we're doing it for the first time or the 10th time or the 100th time. Just provide a mindset and provide an environment where you can have that mental clarity.
Yeah.
Because if you can't, then yeah, it can be very hard to get that time back, right?
Yeah.
And it can be easy to
Yeah.
then become demotivated about your project because like you're actually stepping further away from what you want that vision to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. I also found as well, because I wasn't a big gamer to begin with, and I wasn't going
Yeah.
to lots of board game meets, I didn't really have a lot of experience of other board games.
Yeah.
Since then, obviously, I do join a lot of meets and go to, you know, some board game events. And by not having that experience, almost did me a favour, because I could clearly think about a different mechanic or a different concept for my game without, you know, worrying whether it was going to be like somebody else's. You know, I obviously did the research to make sure it wasn't. But what I know about board games now, I could have easily been led down a different path had I, you know, known about mechanics of other games. You know, I could have steered away maybe from things that I was thinking about, thinking that originally it might have been too similar to another game. So I think by just being a bit naive in the game industry, almost, you know, did me a favour. So yeah,
absolutely. And that goes back to an earlier comment that you said that when you first had the idea that, you know, I enjoy playing games every month, I want to create a game. Like the word that you said was, I want it to be original. I want this to really stand out. And as you said, sometimes that ignorance can be bliss in that regard as well, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, but that's a really good thing in creating something wholly original.
Yeah. It's you know, it did take months of research to make sure that, you know, it wasn't treading in somebody else's space. So, you know, I had this game, and then it was, well, do I take it to market? I knew I wanted to create a game, but I didn't know how serious I was going to be at the time. And I wouldn't have taken it to market if I thought that, you know, I was in somebody else's space or they'd created something similar. You know, I wouldn't want to do that to another designer. So it was, you know, really good that, you know, doing that research, and I could find out that, you know, Trigahex wasn't out there already. So it was something quite original. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I think that was so much of the appeal of it at Tabletop Con as well, and why there are always so many people to my right, like laughing, having heaps of fun, because nothing like it exists.
No.
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on the comment that you said then, you said that, you know, you didn't know how serious it was going to be as well. So run me even through that as well, where you're kind of doing it as a bit of a side project. Again, you're balancing it with a full-time job. It's an opportunity for you to flex your creative hat that you're quite naturally gifted in the creative space. What were some of, I guess, as you think back on it, some of the proof points or some of the signals that kind of made you think, oh, you know what, like I actually want this to be a serious venture for me and more than just a cool story that I can tell on a podcast one day?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, when I first created it, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could bring this to our family game nights for once a month? You know, awesome. When I first thought of it, that was, you know, the best that I thought was going to achieve. And then I started to play with a few friends, with my children who are adults. And, you know, it was the reaction from them. It's like, this is pretty cool. I really like this game. And then you start to get those goosebumps thinking, oh, I might be onto something here. This is quite different. So, and the more people I played with and play tested, that's when I started to change my mind. Well, not change my mind, but think, well, maybe I'm onto something. Maybe I could take it further. So it didn't really start out that I was going to, you know, manufacture, you know, 1,000 copies and for my first order. And I just thought that maybe I'd get a few samples that I could share with the family. And
Absolutely. And I think for me there, it shows that like there's no level of ambition that's right or wrong, right? Like everybody has their own different individual reasons for getting into this hobby / venture. So there's no right answer to that, so to speak. But I think for me, the thing I'd love to dive into a little bit more on that theme of play testing is like getting some really good feedback and just like, oh, you know what, like this is like objective feedback, starting with quite a tight knit circle and then expanding thereafter. But that kind of provides a level of like objectivity that's like, okay, well, if there's some objectively positive feedback coming from this, then let's kind of see what we can do with it. So How did you, in that way, kind of then like systematically, or on reflection, unsystematically, kind of grow your play testing, I guess, wheelhouse to be, expanding from friends and family to, the broader gaming community as well?
Well, because I didn't go to any game meets, that
Yeah.
actually came about at PAX. So
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
I had a stand at PAX, and I really hadn't shared it with many people outside of my close circle by then. I'd played with, friends that had children, or, just friends and family, basically. Graphic designer, obviously, that put the design into print. So then I decided to go for a stand at PAX. So, I had a bit of a panic attack the night before. I had 5 sample games, and that was it. And that was going to be my playtest environment.
Yeah.
So, the night before, I had to get flights down to Melbourne and pay for accommodation and car hire and getting everything down there, and family and friends to help. And I think the night before, I just had a bit of a panic attack, because this is my baby that's been, behind closed doors, I guess, for a year. And now I am sharing it with the world of PAX. So it was a bit scary. The response that I received was just amazing. I had people just wanting to play it all the time, and just the feedback I received every time they played and wanting to place a pre-order for Trigahex was just great. I took 100 pre-orders on the show, and
that's so good.
And I was interviewed by Board Game Barbecue, so they were on board. They had a game there that they were play testing with people. Had 2 in the library as well, so I had lots of people that wanted to play and just kept coming back for more, and gave some really great feedback. So that was just vital. So Absolutely. The game itself, I found, was really receiving good response, but the instructions just needed a bit of tweaking. So so that was great to be able to then come back and tweak the instructions.
Yeah, wonderful. And even we'll touch on that as well, like how you tweak the instructions and like how you use that playtesting feedback to iterate successfully. But even like, just to reflect on, what a courageous move, right? Like, first time game designer, want to get some samples to play with your family game nights every month, to taking a stab and saying, I think there could be something to this. I'm going to go to the biggest gaming event in Australia. Like, walk us through, what kind of led to the crescendo moment where it's like, I'm going to put it all on the table and I'm going to do this.
Well, I don't know whether it was brave or just a bit of madness, really. I just stumbled across PAX, Google like crazy, and just stumble across these things. And I just thought it would be a great idea for some reason. And then just, panicked, start panicking about a week out. And then,
And what did you do and knowing on reflection, it went so well, right? Like, everybody wanted to play, got some great feedback, got some constructive feedback as well. What did you do between the panic stage and rocking up in Melbourne to ultimately change the mental script, right? Like, change the mental script from like, holy crap, what am I doing, to I'm here, I'm going to make it as successful as possible. Like, they're 2 very different frame ups, right? So how did you move from state A to state B?
I've got to be honest, my family, they've been so supportive. I was phoning my brother, who was back on the Gold Coast, going, what am I doing, Dave? This is crazy. And he just kept reassuring me, you're onto something here, you've got something, just stay positive, don't doubt yourself. Just those words from family and friends, and family were with me as well. And it was just their support, really. And people in the game community as well. Met so many great people. I had Matthew Aslin from Platypus Industries next door to me, and he was just really helpful, offering advice. They were all really open to give advice or put me in touch with people that could be helpful. So I was just really open to those conversations, and just so grateful that they were able to steer me in the right direction. So, so the more help I received, the more positive feedback I got. It just, I guess, changed that thought of panicking to thinking, this is okay, this is going well. It's you feel like an imposter in the industry when you're so new, and you start to get that reassurance that you're onto something when you're getting so much great feedback. So it was really nice. It really changed my mindset with Trigahex, because even when I went with the 5 sample games, I still didn't know whether I was going to be able to go into a large print run. So I had hoped by that time. But then receiving that feedback really, reinforced that for me. So,
So true. And I think for me there, the lesson is like keeping an open mind and engaging is really important, but like just that proactivity to put yourself out there. And it's a bit of a gamble, right? And like for some people, going to PAX might not be the stomach churning moment. For some people, committing to making their first prototype might be, or going to a playtesting moment might be. But whatever that stomach churning moment is, like find an authentic way for how you can overcome it. And I think you found a really authentic way because you're great with connecting with people, right? Like we connected not knowing each other a couple of weeks ago. So connect with people, play to your strengths, so that you can authentically change that mental script without trying to force something there that deep down you're not really buying.
And I think the players in PAX taught me a lot about my game too. They were very strategic in the way they played. So, there was these strategies that were coming forward while we were playing that I probably didn't even know about myself. We had
that is fantastic.
Really intense, chess players that played defense all the time. And, one of the things I needed to change in the instructions is what do you do if you run out of cards? Because we had people playing so much defense in the game that, would fill the whole table when they were playing for one hexagon. So it's, I had to write that into the instructions. So it was a case of coming home, brainstorming, well, what do we do if we run out of cards? Had to think of that concept. They probably taught me a lot about my game too that I hadn't maybe thought of, all the different strategies that people use when they're playing. So it was really great. It was like goosebumps moments all the time.
Absolutely. That example almost reminds me of, I'm casting my mind back to like high school English when you're thinking about like what the author was saying when they wrote this. It's like, did they actually mean that to be symbolism, or did they just write that example in there, right? It's just that like actually your audience teaching you more about your creation than what you had in mind, which is and that's a pretty cool moment. That
was just fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. Every game that's played is so different, and there's so much luck as well as strategy. So, you can have all the strategies in the world and still not win, and that's quite often my case, But because there's so much luck involved as well. So, so I really enjoy playing it still. So,
absolutely. And with that specific example there, where, as you said, there was so much defense being played that you had to, that's a new scenario, right? That you hadn't seen in any of your play testing before. So, what was your process with, I guess, both how you engage those players maybe for their thoughts, but then also how you took it away, gave yourself some mental clarity, and ultimately solved the problem? What did you do in that instance?
I found that PAX was so collaborative that I would then speak to the players and say, well, what do you think we should do if we run out of cards? Because you go into a slight panic thinking, oh, geez, what am I going to do if we do run out of cards? I haven't got an answer for them. But then I'd sit down with them and say, well, what do you think? Let's brainstorm this. I'd love to get your ideas, just to see how we write that into the instructions. So I was really open-minded with any feedback that people gave. So that was, really some of those, that instruction came from people that played from different suggestions.
Yeah, fantastic. As you said, like being open-minded, right? Like important with how you engage the events, how you go kind of eyes wide open to understanding how can you maximize the opportunity, being open-minded with being open for feedback, right? And in this case, a very specific scenario emerged that you hadn't controlled for. And I think that's a good thing about this community, as I've learned as well, right? Like it's not seen as a weakness or a shortcoming that this event has happened that you haven't prepped for. It's like, hey guys, you're playing a prototype, right? Like let's think of an answer together. Like there's something pretty cool about that.
And I think people really enjoyed that as well, and I loved embracing it too. I'd like to get their ideas, and when it's your baby and you're working on it for so long, sometimes you can have just a tunnel vision, I guess, of how you see it being played. But I think it's really encouraging, and it's great to get other people's take on how it should work in certain scenarios. The game itself, the way it was designed, there wasn't anything that I had feedback that they thought that needed to change, but definitely run out of cards needed to be addressed. So PAX was fantastic for that.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, how did you specifically address it as well? If you do run out of cards, for any listeners who are going to watchers who are going to play defense the whole time.
So you would use the action cards and start swapping the cards on the table. So, for example, if you draw a replace card, you would replace one card that's on the table with another card that's on the table.
Ah, interesting.
If you
Okay.
play a delete, then you delete the card and put that card back into the opponent's hand.
Yeah.
And the same with the stack. If you've got a card in your hand, you can stack it on top of another. But you have to then play for 3 hexagons to finish the game. Because otherwise, if somebody's got a 1 hexagon and it's just 2 to win, then they've got an unfair advantage.
Yeah. Okay then.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So there's very specific rules of how to play it with the action cards.
Yeah. So, for sure. And then again, to kind of keep continuing going down this rabbit hole a little bit, was that the first idea that you had in terms of how to combat it, or how did you kind of go from then? Okay, I've got some feedback, I've got some different ideas that playtesters have mentioned. How did you go from that stage to what you've just articulated, that here's the answer and here's what's optimal?
Yeah, so keeping those, ideas in mind, but probably about 3 or 4 hours of brainstorming and actually playing a game on defense, constantly, trying not to win to begin with, so that you can end up with a game that's using all the cards, and then just playing that a few times and play testing it with people. But that had to be done quickly because I'd already taken 100 pre-orders by that time. So I was then on a bit of a timeline to work this out. So so that I could then alter the instructions to go into print. Because PAX was in October and people were hoping to get them for Christmas. So I then had to finalise the instructions, rush the manufacturer, fly some games over, and have all that finalised so I could fill the orders for Christmas.
Wow, that's full on. And it's especially full on because earlier you mentioned how you love that you kind of gave yourself the time to work on your own timeline, and working on your own timeline gave yourself that mental clarity that, I'm going to solve this in my own time, but I'm going to be patient with myself. So given that attitude was so instrumental to kind of getting it from vision to prototype, how did you then find when you had to kind of pivot that now I've got a deadline, I've shown this, I've kind of got commitments to customers, I have to almost flip that on its head in order to then move from prototype to finished product? How did you find that part of the journey?
Well, actually, when I was at PAX and the orders were placed, I did pre-warn people that they wouldn't be in stock until January, February. Sure, so I did have that time up my sleeve, but I just held myself accountable. I was determined to get them to people before Christmas because I wanted people to be playing it and enjoying it over Christmas. So I was really that was my deadline, even though the customers had been told, Jan, Feb. And I think they arrived in the country on the 8th of December. So most of them went out, express post. So, So it really, I just held myself accountable, but I still had in the back of my mind, if I can't do it, I'm not going to rush it if I can't find the solution, because I don't want it to affect how the game is produced and how it's played. But, 3 or 4 hours of brainstorming, I felt that, that was a good solution. So I was happy with the end product. So I was happy to go into production and get them out before Christmas.
Yeah, fantastic. I think there's something really important there, that in terms of like keeping promises and keeping commitments, but then by the same token, like only committing or only promising to what you feel you can commit to. So knowing that you kind of bought yourself that extra time, as you said, but then it sounds like as well that like your mindset shifted pretty naturally, that you knew that you were in a different phase of the project. So hence you had to adopt a different mindset to how you brought it to life. And I think that agility is probably an important point for kind of our audience to think about what that means for their projects as well, because just because a mindset or an action or an idea worked really well in the initial phase, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the right approach for every stage of the project. But
I think you've got to be open
successfully.
I think you've got to be open to change, whatever the project demands at that time. So try not to be too hard on myself, but, also seeing it as a challenge if I can get it finished. And I wouldn't have gone into production if I wasn't 100% happy with how I changed the instructions to suit this running out of cards. So
absolutely. And even to, like you mentioned before about how to build the extra rule in, that the instructions had to tweak a little bit, and then you're also challenging yourself all the way throughout the design process with how you can make the instructions as simple to understand as possible. How did you find that process? Because it's kind of one thing to go from the vision to the mechanics to the design, but then you
Yeah,
feel like you're playing the game really well, it's getting really good feedback. It's like, how the hell do I put this on paper
yeah,
so someone's going to be able to play it
yeah,
seamlessly without me being there? So yeah, how did you find
yeah,
that journey? And yeah, what were some tips that you picked up to ultimately come up with a pretty simple document that
yeah.
somebody can read and understand flawlessly without you being there?
Yeah, that was actually probably one of the biggest challenges. So what I
Okay.
did,
Yeah.
I went with 5 sample games from my overseas manufacturer, but I didn't
Yeah.
get him to do the instructions. I had the
Okay.
instructions printed locally. So
Yeah.
then I went through about 4 or 5 edits in my instructions. So I was prepared to spend the time. I'd get the instructions back and then I'd want to tweak it a bit more. So I
Yeah.
found that, yeah, 4 or 5 edits later, and then obviously coming back from PAX, that was another edit. So
Yeah.
I had these instructions with my 5 games that had been produced somewhere else. And I just found that the easiest way to manage it, because I could see it in print, I could get people to play it without me explaining the game, which I play tested that a few times, whether
Yeah.
people could understand the instructions without me being
Right.
there to explain.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then I would go back to the local printer, say, no, I need another edit, and I would just, yeah, spend a bit of time on the wording. But then when we went to PAX, I had the feedback that the instructions were too simple. They felt that there needed to be more explanation. So I actually added, I think it was 4 pages in the instruction booklet after PAX.
Yeah.
So after obviously the explanation of running out of cards, I expanded it by another 3 pages, which is quite a small booklet anyway, and it's quite simple
Yeah.
to understand. But the
Yeah.
feedback was that it didn't explain things well enough. So some of the text needed a bit of expansion.
Interesting. And was that like
Yeah.
the general gameplay, or like more like specific scenarios weren't fleshed out enough?
So a few things. I think it was using the action cards. You know, when you're using a delete action card, do you take away the whole stack? If you're
Okay. Yeah.
deleting a stack of cards, things like that.
Yeah.
Just further clarification, and
Yeah.
also that when you create a hexagon, about all of the cards in the centre of that hexagon need to be your team colour. So I don't think that was explained well enough, because
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I just needed to put a bit more. So a few extra images, you know, needed to be in there to just really show that visually of how the
Yeah.
hexagons, yeah, need to look in the game.
Fantastic. And I think
Yeah,
that's wonderful, right, in itself, that it's a bit of a combination of, again, like blind testing is such a really important and critical way
yeah,
of
yeah,
understanding the communication angle, not just the design angle. But then also as well, you just said that it doesn't have to be words all the time as well. Like, what are the icons? What are the pictures that you're
yeah,
showing,
yeah,
that can really enable your players to hopefully pick up
yeah,
what you're putting down?
yeah. And I found, and also there was a distributor that spoke to me and also gave feedback on the instructions. And it was just a simple, you know, an image that had, you know, showing the game played the wrong way with a cross next to the image and then having a tick next to the correct one. You know, it's
Yeah.
just something simple as that, but it just really gave that clarity of, well, no, you know, you've got to play it this way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Makes complete sense. And I think that even
Mm,
reverting back to something that you said even a lot earlier, in terms of originally having the numbers on the cards as well, and that, you know, you wanted
yeah,
to strip that back because you wanted it to be quite a simple game, which, you know,
yeah,
simple, and yet you can see all the different strategies that emerge through playtesting, right? So how cool is that? Easy to pick up,
yeah.
but enough complexity to kind of everybody's individual flair to shine through. Kind of
Mm,
what made you land on that decision, or what was it about, again, what your vision is or was then for Trigahex, that, because that's quite a big creative decision to make early on in the piece with
yeah.
which path, it's a pretty critical node. So again,
Yeah.
like, you know, what was it that made you go down that angle, that if any designers are thinking about a similar thing, that I do this or do I do that? What were some of
Yeah.
the things that ultimately made you go down that path, do you think?
Yeah, one of the first games I play tested was with my brother, and he was the
Yep.
person that gave that feedback. And he
Okay.
just said, no,
Yeah.
too complicated. He said it's a great game without the numbers on the top of the cards. He said
Yeah.
you just need to simplify it. He said, you know, I could play this over and over again. He said, but
Yeah.
with the numbers on the card, I think you're limiting the amount of play. You know, would people want to keep playing if it's overcomplicated? So yeah, it was really him that, you know, suggested that, and it just made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was just vital feedback from playtesting, and that was one of the first games I played.
Yeah.
And then I decided to create another set of cards, 162 cards later of colouring and cutting out, and so creating my second set of cards. Well, it was actually my third set, because the first set I created, my dog got hold of them and chewed them all. So
that is absolutely brilliant.
So third set later, play testing, and it's just that simplified design without the numbers.
Yeah. And I think one, great to receive such critical yet constructive feedback so early in the journey.
Definitely. And it made it, it's just, so good.
Yeah. And I think for me, even if I may, the extra build on top of that is that through not being kind of like me, right? Like through not being in the industry, you knew the specific occasion that you wanted to go after. Like this is a game that you want families to play around the kitchen table in the same way that you do. And so you're getting feedback from somebody who is part of that occasion, right? They're part of that circle who you're playing games with. So I think that that's something interesting to consider for everybody when play testing. Like, know who your audience is, know what the occasion for your game is. And I know kind of off camera before we said that, sometimes our games and Trigahex, like, the word filler almost sounds disrespectful, but like there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like,
I don't mind that.
Yeah.
Well, it means that all different game players enjoy playing the game, because they could be into these hard games that an hour to set up, and they have a specific starting time, but while they're waiting for those games to start, they'll come and play a game of Trigahex, and that's what they call the filler game. But I don't mind that, because it's exposing it to all different people, and generally they enjoy playing it, and I've had quite a few purchases from people like that. So so although it's quite different to the games that they would normally play, they actually like to have that game to pass a bit of time before something else starts, and they're enjoying it and they're buying it. So
absolutely. And it goes back to your brother's feedback that through knowing that occasion so well, yes, the audience might be quite diverse, but the occasion is a simpler game to in between the main course, or between a family who aren't into heavy games. So then kind of subconsciously knowing that, then you're able to action your brother's feedback because it was super relevant. I think it's just knowing, because sometimes we get play testers, right, who, all pieces of feedback are gifts. I'm not questioning that, but if their games that they normally play are very different to a Trigahex or a Footy Feud or a Capture, then it's like, well, okay, that's really good feedback. Do I want to action that feedback? And if I action that feedback, am I actually taking the game away from what I think the vision for the game should be? And there will be instances, right, depending on maybe the game thematically better fits over here than what you were thinking, that makes you question your creative choices. But I think that through knowing very specifically the occasion you're going after, allowed you to then think about, okay, what are the choices that are going to go into this? How am I going to adapt, the instructions after packs? I've seen this play out. This is indicative of the occasion. I really like this. I like these guys are defensive. Cool. I'm going to action this. So kind of having that kind of almost subconscious compass, I think, has probably helped a lot of the design choices along the way.
Yeah, and I think as well, you get so much feedback that you don't always relate to. So you have to pick and choose what feedback you take on board, and what you really connect with as to whether that's going to be beneficial for your game. So, a lot of feedback I've taken on that's, I've related to, but, there's been some feedback that I haven't related to that I don't think would be beneficial for the game. So I think if you're passionate and have that faith in your game, and you know what direction you want to head, I think you can pick and choose the feedback that's going to be useful to you. So
100%.
Yeah.
That is great feedback in itself.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I guess, Erica, we spent the whole time so far talking about the journey behind Trigahex and some of the leaps that you've made and how you mentally prep yourself for it and the great feedback that you've received for it. What's next now? Like, we met each other at a convention. You've had obviously a really good track record with conventions after your success at PAX, but what's next to help you take the game from where it is at the moment to what you want the game to be? And what are the things you're either going to double down on that have worked, or in the spirit of adapting a different approach to different stages of the project, I guess, what are some things that you might do differently going forward as well to unlock its full potential?
Well, I guess one of the hardest things I found is the social media aspect of Trigahex. So, having limited time and being not very creative in that space, I'm really looking for somebody that can take on social media. and really get the word out there, advertising, and just getting as many people to play it as possible. Trying to go international, looking for a distributor as well, and just really trying to get as many people playing it as I can. There's quite a few extensions I've got in mind for the game. Obviously, I won't go down that path unless I can get Trigahex into more areas. But yeah, the intention is that the extension will just be a set of instructions and action cards. So you buy the original game, and then you can just extend the game by, just purchasing a small portion of the game. So yeah. So really just trying to get it out there, build the popularity, social media. And more sales, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like that almost echoes like a previous thread, right? In terms of as the stages of the journey evolve. It sounds so wanky, stages of the journey. You can tell I'm in sales for a full-time day job using a stupid line like that, but like different opportunities and different problems emerge that again we kind of require a different mindset. So I almost potentially oversimplify that to, in order to scale, as you say, you need a distributor on board, because either you're not going to be able to fulfill e-commerce sales yourself. There aren't enough conventions to get 100 sales every week. So it's kind of like, okay, but that was great to get the word out there, to receive feedback and to legitimize that my game is fun and is potential of scaling, tick. But is that a scalable revenue channel? Oh, you could go back to PAX once a year and get a stand, but then you got to pay for the stand and you got airfares and stuff. So it's okay. So then how do I get more revenue channels fundamentally? And what has to be true for the game to go global, and what does that look like? And then there's the other angle, which I also really struggle with as well. It's like, well, how do I communicate this? Like, I have a game that I've seen firsthand. It is really fun. Like, that's objective. That's not subjective. I've seen random people play it and tell me that they love it. That feels pretty objective. But how do I comms it? What's the right investment? What are the right strategies? So it's, in order to kind of go from here to here, those opportunities and challenges, different ones emerge, I suppose, that we all need to think through as budding game designers.
That's right. And getting someone on board really that can use the right language that I want to use, in the game industry. Have the right target audience, user generated content. So I really want to show more videos of people playing the game and having fun. So I want to start concentrating on some of that social media as well. So yeah, fantastic.
Well, if anybody who's watching or listening has social media expertise, feel free to hit us both up, because I don't have much on that front either. But as I said right from the outset, like a wonderful game that my wife fell in love with basically straight away, right? But I think that comms problem, I don't really like using the word problem, but I think for a lot of us kind of budding designers, we all shared a very similar insight at Tabletop Con, right? That's like, we've committed enough to this where we're giving up our weekend to showcase our game because we believe it's worthy of our time, fundamentally. Like, we wouldn't do it otherwise. How do you scale that message in a way that somebody who hasn't seen Trigahex before or Footy Feud or Capture can understand that straight away? And it's not an easy challenge to solve, unfortunately, but if we can, then we know the product stacks up, which is really encouraging.
Well, I was speaking to the manufacturer last night. So we have regular check-ins every few months. We just have a bit of a brainstorming session, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. And he was telling me about an app called Billow.app, and it's user generated content. So I'm going to start looking into that. So that looks like an option I might go with. And he's got a social media company as well that he's put me in touch with. So he's really, helpful in areas like that.
Yeah, you're great. How does that app work, out of curiosity? I haven't heard of that one before.
I think you put a project on, and then people bid to develop material like videos if they're playing your game. So you give some guidelines. I believe, I haven't looked into it too much at the moment. So there's probably a lot more experienced people out there than I am. But so I think it's a set fee for each of the videos, and you give a brief as to what kind of video you'd like created. So, and obviously you send them the game, and if they're playing the game, and they just record themselves playing. So
wonderful. Well, yes,
So hopefully
certainly.
get some great content, and hopefully they like the game.
Well, it goes back to what we were saying before, right? Like, you have to take a risk and you have to put yourself out there, and going to conventions wasn't your wheelhouse before, and knock packs out of the park. And
Yeah.
we have to take calculated bets. Like, if we're not going to bet on ourselves, unfortunately, and no one else is. You just have to believe that there's enough objective proof points behind it that it's worth the time, it's worth the energy, it's worth the investment. And certainly in your case, all the feedback's there. So I think, that's another kind of a key takeaway for everybody listening in. One, get the feedback for a start, that there's some sense of objectivity or logic driving the decision making. It isn't just getting swept up in our own creation. But then secondly, if you want to scale it, there are going to have to be some risks that you just have to take. And there's going to be some moments that, are going to make your stomach churn, or not to sound too dramatic, but might keep you up at night a little bit thinking that I'm making the right call here or not. But that's all part of the fun, right? As long as we're not, putting an extra mortgage on our house to make this work. It's all part of the learning. So that sounds like another bet worth certainly considering.
But it's all the enjoyment. I think it becomes addictive. I didn't start this with the idea that I was going to be a game developer, but the more I visit, the board game groups that I go to, it's a bit addictive, and you already start thinking of the next project. Well, like yourself, you start thinking of what else you can bring out to the market. So
absolutely,
I'm sold on the industry now.
Oh, for sure. And that's probably a topic worth diving into a little bit more before we wrap up. Like, you described yourself at the start of like feeling a bit of an imposter in the industry. And I must confess, like, I probably feel pretty similar as well. Like we even said before, that I'm almost apologetic that my games are pretty light versus role-playing games that are really kind of a key feature of these conventions. So how's your mental script? Like, knowing that everybody starts from somewhere, everybody's been a first-time designer, how's kind of your mentality evolved from feeling like an imposter to feeling like you belong in this community and that you have something to contribute?
To be honest, I still feel like an imposter. I still go to these events and, asking people's advice and taking on any information I can. And I still feel like that. I think I will do for many years to come, to be honest. But I do also have this belief that, I've got good product and I enjoy watching people's feedback when they play. So I guess that's what drives me to keep going forward. But I'm not shy on asking people for help, or, listening to their stories, or, their challenges, or picking their brains all the time, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
That makes a lot of sense. I think that, again, it's worth finding a mental script that you're comfortable with, right? And if that helps you embrace an open mind where you can get the most out of it and gain new connections and gain new insights, then keep being an imposter, I guess, right? Like, there's really no need to change that, really. If it's helping unlock that part of
that's right.
what the overall brand is known for. Now, just before we finish up, Erica, I'm making it a bit of a tradition to ask my guests if you have a question for me, or if you have a question for the community that I can ask the next guest. So either or, your choice.
Jeez. Let me think. Jeez, I have so many questions from the game community. No, I'll ask you a question. So what did you find the most challenging when you were bringing out Footy Feud?
Most challenging? A lot. A lot is the headline. I think certainly different stages, right? I think there's probably, I'll mention 3 specific things, and that will give me enough time to think about what the 3 specific things are. I think the first one almost goes back to imposter syndrome a little bit. Like, I first introduced it to, so I first had the idea for the game in my then girlfriend, now wife, so my parent-in-laws in their living room, essentially. And one of the first ways I thought I'd get some people to play test it is I took it down to my local cricket club, because I was playing senior cricket at the time, and I showed it to them, and they basically laughed at me. Like, it's like, Willow, like, what are you doing? I'm not interested in play testing this thing. What the hell is it? A footy themed card game? Like, who cares? What do I want to play this thing for? I remember it was an end of season dinner, sat down, no one wanted to play it. The guys who did thought it was the most complex thing on earth. And it was like, how is this complicated? It's so simple to play. So I think
Yeah.
even like overcoming that barrier of, is this thing even worth spending any time on at all? And getting some
Yeah.
pretty brutal feedback, I suppose. But then the
Yeah.
audience was wrong. So once I pivoted that to actually playtesting it with, believe it or not, the kids who I was coaching cricket at their time, or with parents' supervision in a very controlled space, the parents were like, well, hang on a second, this is actually really good for their maths. And the kids like, a footy game that I can play and battle against other lads. Yeah, this is awesome. I want to play this. And when we refined the rules and stuff, like, okay, great. So discard the first bit of negative press. That was actually okay. I think the second part is, and it's the same with capture as well. Like, I think my niche as a designer is working with licensed IP. But licensed IP, you're not necessarily giving up control, but you are giving up a lot of control of your timeline, because it's incredibly conditional on getting, it's solely conditional on getting approvals from your licensor. So I think back to the AFL, like the AFL are wonderful to work with. And they basically approve everything that I submit to them. But I had my first pitch meeting with them back in, I think it was August 2016, and then product released the next year in September 2017. And kind of all during that period, you're kind of thinking like, will this get up? Will it not? You're trying to find a very fine balance between being the squeaky wheel so that you're not forgotten about, versus you're the small fry who means nothing to them. This guy's just annoying. Like, I don't want to work with him because he's more noise than benefit. So I think finding that balance, and there's probably been similar kind of learnings with Marvel as well, knowing that had the idea in 2019 and it's going to take until 2023 until products on the shelf. So I think that's the whole second piece. And then I think the third one is just, man, it's the whole kind of theme is like being resilient. I think like not every post is going to be a winner. I do believe that you have to bet on yourself and that you have to be your strongest advocate. That doesn't diminish that the idea is no good or the product's no good, but like not every bet is going to pay off. And I think that almost just gearing up for that, going in with the best intentions, but not being too disappointed when everything doesn't work. It's not our full-time job, which is great, right? So it means that our risk appetite can be a little bit stronger.
You have that.
But you also kind of, but you're also kind of, you're not so optimistic that you're going to hit a home run every time. So I think for me, like, there's been some social media bets that I've taken that probably haven't paid off, or there's been some learnings with where to invest the proceeds that had come through. Maybe I paid a bit too much on that on reflection. So I think that
that's quite a challenge, isn't it? Knowing where to invest.
100%, and like I think partly is because you're running the numbers on what you've made so far, but then if you want the game to scale, you then need to think about, well, if I want it to go from here to here, then you kind of need to invest somewhere in the middle. Which can then be a fair bit of your proceeds from what you've already made, or it could even be a loss-making venture for a little bit, but then you're taking a bet on yourself that eventually it will pay off. And sometimes going back to your analogy before, not analogy fact before, you can have the best strategies in the world. Sometimes you can have some bad luck, right? Or sometimes you can have bad strategies and good luck and things pay off. And I think for me, a bit of a sliding doors moment for myself was back in 2020. I managed to get a contact at Coles almost by random, and they said, fantastic, we'd like to take it in 200 stores. And it's like, whoa, like we've been in lockdown in Melbourne for 6 months at this stage. Independent retail was basically closed. Specialty retail was closed. Everybody was funneling their purchasing habits through grocery. And now a grocery retailer wants to take it on. Like, that's pretty cool.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, so I kind of think, and that's a real, if that didn't happen, right, then maybe, I mightn't be, I don't think the game would still be in Coles if that wasn't the case, and since gone into Woolworths since then as well. So I think that I owe that Coles team member. 100%. And then that's not to say that there haven't been losses since then at all. But you do kind of need those spikes for energy along the way, I think, because it can be a grind. And as much as it's a creative side hustle, it's still a grind, right? You have to embrace the grind. Not every day you're going to feel like a champion. Not every day you're going to get that great feedback that gives you goosebumps, and you just need to mentally ready yourself for it.
And that determination and consistency, even when the chips are down. just to know that you're staying on that path and just be determined to make it succeed.
100%.
Yeah, because there's times I think throughout the game design that you feel like giving up. You think, oh, this is too hard. Why am I doing this?
Absolutely.
But just to keep that determination, that consistency, and just have that faith. Makes all the difference.
It's a really key point, right? And I think and that's probably a nice point to almost like loop back to the wrap up as well, that like there has to be an objective insight that guides it. Like it just can't be based on emotion that you're seeing something that isn't there. It has to be knowing, like I've play tested this, I've taken a punt.
Yeah.
Even if it's friends and family give really objective feedback. I know the gaming community is quite divided on the role that friends and family can play in providing that. But I think even you share the contrast between our two examples. Your occasion was with your friends and family around the kitchen table. You asked your friends and family, would this be worthy of being on our kitchen table? I'm like, yeah, absolutely it would. Mine is a family game played between like kids in primary school with their parents. And I asked my Bogan cricket mates, would they play this? Like just wrong place to start, right? So I think like know your audience is really key. And then that kind of guides the whole process from there. Secondly, have objectivity for sure. Like you have to have that compass that allows you to be determined, be resilient, invest time, invest energy, invest a bit of this. I think thirdly, like I come back to the comment that you made earlier, just having a really clear mind and backing yourself in. So I think they're probably for yourself is having a clear mind, but probably the macro insight is knowing yourself. Like just know how you operate, know what it takes to get the best out of yourself, because especially for the first time designers, like no one's pushing you, right?
No, that's right.
So if you don't know how to get the best out of yourself, then it's going to be really challenging to ultimately translate that vision into action. I think another really key kind of sliding doors moment for yourself and a key insight from tonight is, put yourself out there and take a punt, right? Like we've just kind of said that every bet doesn't take off, but wow, you went from play testing in a very closed circle to I'm going to fly to Melbourne and go to PAX.
To thousands of people.
100%, right? But then I think fifthly, and this is probably my last key insight to wrap up, like have a mental script or have a process that enables you to go from like, holy crap, I don't know what I'm doing, to, I'm going to give this a go and it will be what it will be. And that will be different for everybody. Like we all get the jitters. We all have those moments that make our stomach clench. We can't avoid it, right? If we're trying to avoid it, then the game's not going to take off. Like it's probably as simple as that. So
it wouldn't happen if you weren't passionate about it.
Absolutely. So like find a strategy that enables you to lean into it, embrace it, and ultimately make the most of it, because you've met a lot of people through it. You're now a regular on the convention scene now as well, which is pretty cool. And you're having heaps of fun with it, right? Which is incredibly important as well.
I still enjoy every game I play, and I love watching other people play it and get that enjoyment. And that's the goosebump moments that I get from these conventions. I just really enjoy myself at those times, just watching other people get that enjoyment. So,
That's brilliant. Well, thanks again for joining us tonight, Erica. Again, like
Thank
wonderful
you.
to hear more about your story. A very unique story for sure. Hope everybody listening and watching got something out of it. I know I certainly did. Again, that pack story that did not know about is unbelievable. That's my clear highlight from tonight, just going to PAX and giving it a crack. But again, for anybody who's listening tonight or watching tonight for the first time or repeat, again, would love it. Any feedback, comments, builds, really using this as an initiative to give back and hopefully contribute something to the community. So all feedback is welcome. See you next time.